They want me to talk about Normandy, about D-Day, about the beaches. I wasn't on the beaches, not during the assault. I came after, with the second wave of medical personnel, landed on Omaha Beach around noon on June 6, 1944. By then, the worst of the fighting was over. The boys had already taken the beach, already climbed those cliffs, already died by the thousands. But my war, the part I'll never forget, that was just beginning. My name is Lieutenant Catherine Hayes. I was 24 years old in June of 1944, an Army nurse with the 2nd Field Hospital, attached to the 1st Infantry Division. The Big Red One, they called it. I joined the Army Nurse Corps in 1942, right after finishing nursing school in Boston. Patriotic duty, wanting to help, all the usual reasons young women enlisted. I thought I'd be serving stateside, maybe in England if I was unlucky. Never thought I'd end up wading through blood on a French beach. We trained in England for months. They prepared us for field conditions, working in tents, dealing with mass casualties, operating under combat conditions. They showed us pictures of wounds, described what we'd see, tried to prepare us. You can't prepare for it. You can only experience it and try not to break. We knew the invasion was coming. Everyone knew. The buildup in southern England was impossible to hide. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of men, supplies stacked everywhere. Something massive was about to happen. They told us bits and pieces, amphibious assault, heavy resistance expected, massive casualties anticipated. We'd need to be ready to handle thousands of wounded. Thousands. I remember thinking they were exaggerating, being dramatic to keep us sharp. They weren't. The night before D-Day, June 5th, we boarded our transport ship, LST-338, landing ship, tank, not designed for passengers, but that's what we had. 23 nurses, 30 medics, doctors, equipment, supplies. We sailed at dawn on June 6th, could hear the naval bombardment from miles away. The sky was gray, overcast. The channel was rough. Most of the girls were seasick. I stood on deck and watched the coast of France appear through the morning mist, watched the flashes from the big guns, watched the smoke rising from the beaches. And I thought about my brother. He was with the 29th Infantry Division. He'd be landing on Omaha Beach in the first wave. I prayed. First time I'd really prayed since I was a child. Please let him survive. Please let him survive this day. We landed around noon. The ramp dropped, and I got my first look at Omaha Beach. I'd never seen anything like it, never imagined anything like it. Bodies everywhere, in the water, on the sand, tangled in the obstacles. Some were still moving, most weren't. The water was red, actually red, with blood. The sand was churned up, cratered, covered in equipment and wreckage and pieces of things that had been human beings. The smell hit me next, blood and smoke and diesel fuel and something else. Something sweet and terrible that I'd later learn was death itself. We waded ashore through that water, through that blood, trying not to look at what was floating around us, trying not to think about it. Move! Move! Get to the aid station, an officer was shouting, directing traffic, getting us off the beach and into the dunes. The aid station was a hastily dug depression in the sand, covered with tarps, already overflowing with wounded. Men lying everywhere, some screaming, some silent, some being worked on by medics who looked like they'd aged 10 years in 6 hours. Thank God, one of the doctors said when he saw us. We need every hand. Get to work. No orientation, no briefing, just get to work. I looked around at the wounded, at the sheer number of them, at the severity of the injuries, at the blood, so much blood. And I realized that everything I'd learned, everything I'd trained for, was about to be tested in ways I'd never imagined. We worked on that beach for hours, triaging, treating, stabilizing men enough to evacuate them back to England, making the impossible decisions about who could be saved and who couldn't. By nightfall, we'd treated over 300 men, lost count of how many died, stopped counting after the first dozen. That first night, June 6th into June 7th, That was the longest night of my life. That was the night I learned what war really was. And that was the night that would haunt me for the next 40 years. By 1800 hours, 6 p.m., we'd moved the aid station slightly inland, still within range of German artillery, but off the exposed beach. They'd set up tents, brought in more supplies, established a more organized treatment area. Organized, that's a generous word for what it was. We had 3 surgical tents and a receiving area. Wounded were still coming in constantly, from the beach, from inland where the fighting continued, from units pushing toward the bluffs, ambulances, jeeps, stretcher bearers, sometimes men just walking in, holding their guts in with their hands. The flow never stopped. I was assigned to the receiving tent with 2 other nurses, Lieutenant Mary Sullivan from Chicago and Lieutenant Grace Chen from San Francisco. Our job was triage, sort the incoming wounded into categories: immediate surgery, can wait, minor wounds, and the others, the ones we couldn't save. Expectant, they called them, expected to die. I'd done triage and training on mannequins and simulations. It was neat, orderly, academic. This was chaos. A young corporal came in around 1830. Couldn't have been more than 19. Took shrapnel from a mortar round. His left leg was gone below the knee, blown off, not surgically amputated. The other leg was badly mangled. And his abdomen, I could see intestines. He was conscious, looking at me with these wide, terrified eyes. "Am I going to be okay, ma'am?" he asked. Southern accent. Alabama, maybe. Georgia. I looked at his wounds. Looked at the surgical tents, already overflowing, doctors working as fast as they could. Looked at the line of wounded waiting. Men who had better chances, men we could save. "You're going to be fine," I lied. Tagged him expectant, had him moved to the expectant tent. He died 20 minutes later, alone, because we were too busy with the ones we could save. That was the first. There would be many more before the night was over. A private came in missing both arms, blown off at the elbows by a grenade. He was in shock, not feeling the pain yet, asking where his rifle was. Said he needed to get back to his unit. We stabilized him, tagged him for immediate surgery. He'd live. If he didn't bleed out waiting, if infection didn't set in, if a dozen other things didn't go wrong. But he'd never hold a rifle again, never hold anything again. A sergeant with half his face gone, jaw destroyed, eye socket empty. Still conscious, trying to speak through the ruin. We gave him morphine, lots of it, tagged him for surgery, but knew the surgeons would have to decide if he was even operable. He died on the table, probably a mercy. The wounds were beyond anything we'd trained for. These weren't clean injuries. These were men who'd been hit by machine gun fire, artillery, mortars, grenades, bodies torn apart by industrial violence, limbs missing, organs exposed, bones shattered, and we were supposed to fix them with limited supplies, limited space, limited everything. Mary vomited twice in the first hour, had to step outside, compose herself, come back in. Grace was silent, almost mechanical, just working, not thinking, not feeling. I fell somewhere in between, functioning but aware, doing what needed to be done while part of me screamed. Around 1900 hours, the German artillery found our range. Shells started landing nearby, close enough to shake the tents, close enough to spray dirt through the openings. We kept working. What else could we do? The wounded couldn't be moved. We couldn't abandon them. A shell landed 50 yards away. The concussion knocked equipment off tables. One of the wounded started screaming, not from new wounds, just from terror. We kept working. By 2000 hours, 8 p.m., we'd triaged over 100 men. Maybe a third were expectant. Another third needed immediate surgery. The rest were stabilized and waiting for transport back to England. But the ships weren't taking wounded yet. Too dangerous with German artillery still active. So the men just waited, bleeding, dying, waiting. The morphine was running low. We were rationing it, giving it only to the worst cases, Men with minor wounds, broken arms, flesh wounds, shrapnel in non-vital areas. They got nothing for the pain, just bandages and apologies. Some of them took it well, gritted their teeth, said they understood, said save it for the guys who really needed it. Others screamed, begged. One private, kid from Ohio with shrapnel in his thigh. He grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. Please, he was crying. Please, it hurts so bad. Please. I can't, I said. I'm sorry. We need to save it for... Please. I pulled away, moved to the next patient, left him crying. That's what war does. Makes you hard. Makes you leave crying boys in pain because other boys are dying. Around 2,100 hours, they brought in a group of wounded from a destroyed tank. 4 men, all burned. The smell, Jesus, the smell of burned flesh. It made everyone gag. 2 died within minutes. Blessing, really. The other 2, we did what we could. Gave them morphine. We couldn't not give it to them. Covered the burns. Tried to get fluids in them. They wouldn't survive the night. We knew it. They probably knew it, but we tried anyway. A captain came through around 21:30 looking for his men. His company had taken heavy casualties on the beach. He had a list of names. Wanted to know who'd made it, who hadn't. We didn't have good records. Couldn't. Too many coming in too fast. Dog tags got lost. Men couldn't speak. Some had no identification at all. I don't know, I kept saying. I'm sorry. I don't know. He looked destroyed. Lost. 25 years old and responsible for 100 men, half of whom were dead or missing. They were supposed to follow me off the boat, he said. I told them to follow me. I thought they were right behind me. He left, went to check the expectant tent, the morgue area, looking for his men. I never saw him again. Hope he found some of them. Hope it gave him closure. By 2,200 hours, we'd been working for 10 hours straight. No food, no rest, just constant flow of broken bodies and impossible decisions. Mary collapsed, just fainted. Exhaustion and stress and horror. We laid her out in the corner, gave her water when she came to, sent her back to work. We needed everyone, couldn't afford to rest, couldn't afford to break down, not yet. Midnight approached. The longest day of the war was ending, but the longest night was just beginning. Midnight came and the wounded kept coming. They'd been fighting inland all day, pushing through hedgerows, taking villages, clearing German positions. Every yard cost blood, and all that blood was flowing back to us. The surgical tents were operating nonstop. 3 tables, 3 teams working by lamplight. Amputations mostly. When a limb was too damaged, you couldn't save it. Took too long. Used too many resources. You cut it off and moved on. I could hear the saws, even over all the other noise, the moaning, the orders being shouted, the artillery in the distance. I could hear the saws cutting through bone. That sound, Christ, that sound. Around 100 hours, a chaplain arrived. Young guy, maybe 26. Father Michael, he said, came to give last rites, comfort the dying. He lasted maybe 30 minutes in the expectant tent before he came out, pale and shaking. There are so many, he said. So many boys. Yes, I said, and more coming. He went back in, doing his duty. But I saw his hands shaking as he made the sign of the cross. Even the chaplain was breaking. They brought in a lieutenant around 0130, officer from the 29th Infantry Division. Shot in the chest, punctured lung, drowning in his own blood. We got a tube in, drained the blood, stabilized him enough for surgery. While I was working on him, he grabbed my hand, looked at me with these desperate eyes. Hayes, he managed to say, looking for Corporal Tom Hayes, 29th Infantry. My brother. He was asking about my brother. I don't know, I said. My voice sounded far away. I haven't seen him. Tell him, he coughed, blood on his lips. Tell him Lieutenant Morrison tried to get them off the beach, he passed out. We got him to surgery. Don't know if he made it. But now I knew. My brother had been in the first wave, on Omaha, where thousands had died, and I didn't know if he was one of them. I kept working, had to. Couldn't think about it, couldn't let myself feel it. Just keep moving, keep treating, keep functioning. Around 200, a young private came in, 18 years old, baby-faced, shot in the abdomen. I opened his uniform to assess the wound, and his intestines fell out, literally spilled out onto the table. We tried, got them back in, got him to surgery, but there was too much damage. Internal bleeding we couldn't control. He died on the table. Before he went under, he was crying, "I want my mom. Please, I want my mom." 18 years old, crying for his mother while his insides fell out. I held his hand while the surgeon worked, told him he'd be okay, told him we'd get him home, told him everything would be fine. All lies, but they were the kind lies, the necessary ones. A sergeant came in around 0230, both legs mangled by a mine, conscious, lucid, in terrible pain. We'd run out of morphine in the receiving tent, had to send someone to get more from the supply depot. He waited, screaming. There was nothing we could do but hold him down and tell him help was coming. The morphine arrived. I gave him double dose, had to. The pain was beyond human. He died anyway, bled out internally. We couldn't see the damage, couldn't stop it, just watched him fade despite everything we did. Grace Chen broke around 300. A soldier came in, Chinese-American kid, from her hometown in San Francisco. She knew his family, had gone to school with his older sister. He'd taken a shell fragment to the chest, massive wound, no chance. She tried anyway, tried to save him. Worked on him for 20 minutes, even though we all knew, even though I tried to pull her away. He died, and Grace just stood there, covered in his blood, staring at nothing. "I have to write to his mother," she said quietly. "I have to tell Mrs. Chen that her son died, that I couldn't save him." Mary led her outside. She came back 10 minutes later and kept working, but something in her eyes had gone out. We were breaking, all of us, but we couldn't stop. The wounded kept coming. Around 0330, casualties from a German counterattack started arriving, dozens of them, fresh wounds, urgent wounds. We went from managing the flow to being overwhelmed. Men were dying in the receiving tent because we couldn't get to them fast enough. Dying, waiting for treatment that never came because someone else was dying faster. Triage became meaningless. We just grabbed whoever was closest and tried to keep them alive long enough to get them to surgery. A corporal with both arms gone, a private with his face carved open by shrapnel, a sergeant with his stomach ripped open by machine gun fire, a lieutenant with his legs shattered, one after another. We ran out of bandages, started tearing up sheets, blankets, anything we could use. Ran out of sulfa powder, ran out of plasma, ran out of almost everything. We kept working anyway, improvising, making do, trying to save boys with inadequate supplies and exhausted hands. Around 400, I stepped outside for air, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The tent was too hot, too close, too full of blood and death. I stood in the darkness and threw up, violently, everything in my stomach, then dry heaved for another minute. A medic found me, Private Johnson. He'd been working just as long as we had. "Ma'am, you okay?" "Fine," I said, wiping my mouth. "Just needed air." "Yeah." He lit a cigarette, offered me one. I took it, even though I didn't smoke. Hell of a day. "How many?" I asked. "How many did we lose?" He was quiet for a moment. "Thousands. On the beach alone. Thousands more inland, and it's not over." "No," I said, "it's not over." We stood there in the darkness, smoking, listening to the distant artillery, listening to the screams from the tents. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, "that this can't be real, that nothing this awful can be real, that I'm going to wake up and it's all been a nightmare." "I know," I said, "but it is real." "Yes, and we have to go back in there." "Yes." We finished our cigarettes, went back inside. There were still hundreds of wounded, still boys dying, still work to be done. The surgeons were exhausted, making mistakes, taking too long. One of them, Captain Richards, 40 years old, veteran of the last war, he was operating and just stopped. froze, stared at the boy on his table with empty eyes. "I can't," he said. "I can't do this anymore." Another surgeon took over. Richards walked out, didn't come back for an hour. When he did, he was composed, professional, and he went back to cutting. That's what we all did. Broke a little, pulled ourselves together, went back to cutting. Dawn approached, June 7th. We'd been working for over 12 hours without stopping, without eating, without sleeping, and we weren't done. We'd never be done. Dawn came, gray and cold. The bombardment continued. The fighting continued. The dying continued. And we'd made it through the night, barely. By 0600 hours on June 7th, we'd been working for nearly 14 hours straight. New nurses had arrived with the supply ships, fresh personnel to relieve us. But there were too many wounded. We couldn't stop, couldn't hand off our duties when men were still dying. So we kept working. The daylight made it worse somehow. At night, you couldn't see everything. The shadows hid some of the horror. But in the morning light, you saw it all. Every wound, every face, every drop of blood. The expectant tent in daylight was, God, I can't describe it properly. 20, maybe 30 men, some already dead, some dying, some conscious and aware they were dying, all of them abandoned because we couldn't save them. I had to walk through there to get supplies, had to step around bodies, had to ignore the hands reaching out, the voices calling for help. "Nurse, please, nurse." But we'd already decided they couldn't be saved, already made the choice, and we had to live with it. A young corporal, blonde hair, blue eyes, someone's son from Iowa or Kansas or somewhere. He grabbed my ankle as I passed. "Please don't leave me here," he whispered, "please." His abdomen was destroyed. Sepsis had already set in. Even if we operated, even if we did everything right, he wouldn't survive. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry." I pulled away, kept walking, left him there to die. I can still see his face. 40 years later, I can still see his face. More wounded arrived throughout the morning. The fighting inland was intensifying. The Germans were counterattacking, trying to push us back into the sea. Every counterattack meant more casualties, more broken boys, more impossible decisions. Around 800, word came through. The ships were ready to take wounded. We could start evacuations. Priority went to the ones who could survive transport, stable but serious cases, men who needed proper hospital facilities in England. The expectant cases stayed. No point wasting space on men who'd die anyway. We loaded stretchers onto ambulances, onto trucks, onto anything that could move, got them down to the beach and onto landing craft, sent them out to the hospital ships waiting offshore. Hundreds of them, a steady stream of broken bodies flowing back to England. But for everyone we evacuated, 2 more arrived. By 1000 hours, I hadn't eaten in over 18 hours. Hadn't sat down, hadn't rested, was running on coffee and adrenaline and nothing else. My hands were shaking, my vision was blurring. I'd make stupid mistakes, drop instruments, forget steps, lose focus. But I kept working. We all did. Mary collapsed again around 10:30, just fell down, unconscious. They carried her to a tent, gave her fluids, let her sleep for an hour. When she woke up, she came back to work. That's what we all did. Worked until we dropped, rested for an hour, worked again. Around 1100, they brought in a group of German prisoners, wounded Germans. They'd been captured during the counterattack. Some of the medics didn't want to treat them. "Let the bastards die," one said. "They're the ones who did this." But they were wounded, they were suffering, and we were nurses, medical personnel. We treated everyone. I worked on a young German soldier, 19 years old, shot in the leg, simple wound. He was terrified, thought we were going to kill him. "Is this okay?" I said. "My German was terrible, but I tried." "We help. We help you." He cried, just broke down crying. Relief or fear or both. He survived. We patched him up, sent him to the POW area. He was someone's son too, someone's brother. War makes everyone monsters and victims at the same time. Around noon on June 7th, 24 hours after we'd landed, I finally saw a list of casualties from the 29th Infantry Division. My hand shook as I read through it, looking for one name. Please, God, don't let it be there. Please. It wasn't. Tom Hayes. Not on the KIA list, not on the MIA list. Wounded, maybe. Evacuated already. But not dead. Not confirmed dead, anyway. I stood there, holding that list, feeling nothing. Too exhausted to feel relief. Too numb to feel anything. He might be alive, might not. I didn't know. Wouldn't know for days, maybe weeks. But for now, he wasn't confirmed dead. That was something. I went back to work. More wounded. Always more wounded. The flow never stopped. Men with arms gone, legs gone, faces destroyed, guts hanging out, burns, shrapnel, gunshots. We treated them all, saved some, lost others, tagged some expectant and sent them to die. Over and over and over. By 1,400 hours, we'd been working for 20 hours. Some of the medical staff were hallucinating from exhaustion, seeing things, hearing things. One medic swore he saw his dead brother in the expectant tent, tried to save him, had to be restrained. We were breaking, all of us. Bodies and minds pushed beyond endurance, but we kept going because men were still dying, because our boys needed us, because stopping meant letting them die alone. Around 1,600 hours, 4 p.m. on June 7th, the flow finally slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. The immediate crisis was passing. The worst cases had been handled. The backlog was clearing. They ordered us to rest in shifts. 4 hours off, then back to work. I stumbled to a tent, collapsed on a cot, didn't even take off my boots, just fell into unconsciousness. I slept for 3 hours, woke up screaming from nightmares, the blonde corporal grabbing my ankle, the 18-year-old crying for his mom, the intestines falling out, the burns, the screaming, all of it, replaying in fast forward. I woke up and I was still there, still in Normandy, still covered in dried blood, still exhausted beyond measure. And in 1 hour, I'd have to go back to work, back to the tents, back to the wounded, back to deciding who lives and who dies, back to the war that never ended. I sat on that cot in that tent and I cried. First time since landing, first time I'd let myself feel anything. I cried for the boys we'd lost, for the ones we couldn't save, for the blonde corporal and the 18-year-old and all the others whose faces I'd never forget. I cried for myself, for what this war was doing to me, for the person I used to be, who was dying here just as surely as those boys in the expectant tent. Then I wiped my face, drank some water, washed my hands, and I went back to work because that's what you did. You broke a little, you cried a little, and then you kept going. There was no other choice. June 8th, the third day. The wounded kept coming, but the intensity had dropped. We'd stabilized the beachhead. The initial crisis was over. Now it was just war, regular war, the daily grind of casualties and death. I'd been awake for 36 hours with only that 3-hour break. I was functioning on instinct, muscle memory. My body knew what to do even when my brain couldn't process it anymore. Around 900, they brought in a young lieutenant, 22 years old, mortar fragment to the abdomen, serious but potentially survivable with immediate surgery. We prepped him, got him on the table, started the procedure. Halfway through, he crashed. Blood pressure dropped. Heart stopped. We tried to bring him back. Compressions, adrenaline, everything we had, nothing. He died on the table. Died while we were trying to save him. Died despite our best efforts. It happens in surgery, complications, hidden injuries, bodies just giving up. It happens, but this was different. I realized, standing there, looking at his body, that we'd made a mistake. Early in the surgery, a small mistake. Cut something we shouldn't have. Missed something we should have caught. We were too tired, too exhausted, and our exhaustion had killed him. Captain Richards, the surgeon, realized it too. I saw it in his face, the moment of recognition, the horror. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Jesus Christ, what did we do? He walked out of the tent. I followed him. He was standing in the rain. It had started raining that morning, just standing there. letting it soak him. We killed him, he said. Not the Germans, U.S. We killed him. We were trying to save him, I said. And we failed, because we're too goddamn tired to think straight, because they're working us to death and we're making mistakes and boys are dying for it. He was right. We all knew it. We'd been going too long, too hard. We were making mistakes. Small ones mostly, but in surgery, small mistakes kill. What do we do? I asked. He looked at me, looked at this 24-year-old nurse who'd aged 10 years in 3 days. We go back in there. We keep working. We try not to kill anyone else. We went back in, but something had broken. Some part of me that had been holding on, maintaining composure, keeping it together, it cracked. I started seeing them all. Every patient was that lieutenant. Every wound was our fault. Every death was because we weren't good enough, fast enough, careful enough. The guilt was crushing. Around 1100, a young private came in, 19 years old, shot in the chest, pneumothorax, collapsed lung. Simple procedure. I'd done it dozens of times in the last 3 days. I got the chest tube ready, positioned him, found the insertion point, and I froze. My hands wouldn't move. I stood there, tube in hand, knowing what to do, but unable to do it. Lieutenant, the medic assisting me. Lieutenant Hayes, I can't. Ma'am, we need to. I can't. Another nurse took over. Grace Chen, she did the procedure, saved the boy's life. I stood there, useless, while she worked. Catherine, she said quietly when she was done, you need to rest. I'm fine. You're not fine. None of us are fine, but you need to stop before you hurt someone. You need to rest. Please. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist I was okay, but I wasn't. I was breaking, completely, utterly breaking. They sent me to the rest tent, ordered me to sleep, 4 hours minimum. I lay on that cot and stared at the tent ceiling. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't turn off my brain. All I could see was the lieutenant dying on the table, the mistake we made, the life we took through our exhaustion. All I could hear was the blonde corporal begging me not to leave him, the 18-year-old crying for his mom, the screaming that never stopped. All I could feel was the weight of it. Every death, every failure, every boy we couldn't save. I'd become a nurse to help people, to heal, to save lives. And here in this hell, I'd killed through negligence, through exhaustion, through being human and failing. Around 1400, Mary Sullivan found me, sat on the edge of my cot. Can't sleep, she asked. I shook my head. Me neither. I tried earlier, just can't shut it off. We sat in silence for a moment. Grace told me what happened, Mary said. About the lieutenant. About you freezing. I killed him. No, the war killed him. I made a mistake. We're all making mistakes, Catherine. We're exhausted. We're traumatized. We're being asked to do the impossible with inadequate supplies and no rest. We're human. We break. But boys are dying. Boys are dying anyway. Her voice cracked, tears in her eyes. Boys are dying no matter what we do. We save 10 and lose 20. We work ourselves to death, and it's never enough. It's never enough. She was crying, openly crying. I can't do this anymore, she said. I can't keep watching them die. Can't keep making these choices. Can't keep... She trailed off. We sat there, 2 broken nurses in a tent in Normandy, crying together. But we will, I said finally. We'll keep doing it. Why? Because they need us. Because if we stop, who will help them? Someone else. There is no one else. Just us. Just broken people trying to save broken people. Mary wiped her eyes, nodded. Yeah. Around 1600, word came through. My brother, Tom Hayes, he'd been found, wounded but alive, evacuated to England 2 days ago, shrapnel wound to the shoulder, would recover fully. He was alive. I should have felt relief, joy, something, but I felt nothing. Just emptiness, numbness. My brother lived. The lieutenant died. The blonde corporal died. The 18-year-old died. Hundreds died. Some lived, most didn't. And I was supposed to care more about some than others. supposed to feel worse about the ones I knew. They were all someone's brother, someone's son. All of them mattered. All of them died in pain and fear, and I couldn't save any of them. That night, June 8th into June 9th, I went back to work, did my shift, treated wounded, made decisions, functioned. But the part of me that cared, the part that felt, it was gone, buried under the weight of too much death, too much suffering, too much guilt. I'd become a machine like the ones that killed these boys, just another cog in the machinery of war, processing bodies, saving some, losing others, moving on to the next. That's what survival required, becoming something less than human, something that could function in this hell without breaking completely. I'd survived Normandy, but the Catherine Hayes who landed on that beach 3 days ago, she didn't survive. She died somewhere between the blonde corporal and the lieutenant on the table. What was left was just a nurse, just hands and training and muscle memory. The person inside was gone, and I wasn't sure she'd ever come back. She didn't. It's been 40 years since Normandy, 40 years since that longest night, and the Catherine Hayes who went to nursing school in Boston, who wanted to help people, who believed in healing. She never came back from France. I stayed with the 2nd Field Hospital through the rest of the war, followed the advance through France, through Belgium, into Germany, treated thousands more wounded, watched thousands more die. Each battle blurred into the next. Each aid station looked the same. Each night brought the same nightmares. By the time the war ended in May 1945, I'd spent 3 years doing triage. 3 years deciding who lives and who dies. 3 years watching boys bleed out while I moved on to the next one. They gave me medals. Bronze Star for Valor, unit citations, commendations for my service. I threw them in a drawer when I got home, haven't looked at them since. What was I supposed to do with medals earned by letting boys die, by making mistakes that killed, by becoming something cold enough to function in hell? I came home in July 1945. My parents threw a party. My brother Tom was there. He'd been discharged months earlier. Friends, neighbors, everyone celebrating the heroes who'd won the war. I couldn't stay, made it about an hour before I had to leave, went to my room and didn't come out for 2 days. Tom understood. He'd seen combat too, had his own nightmares, his own ghosts. We didn't talk about it much, but we understood each other. The rest of them, the ones who'd stayed home, they didn't understand, couldn't. They'd seen the newsreels, read the papers, heard the stories, but they hadn't been there, hadn't smelled it, hadn't touched it, hadn't watched boys die begging for their mothers. They wanted me to be proud, to celebrate, to move on. I tried. God knows I tried. I went back to nursing, got a job at Boston General, thought maybe regular nursing, civilian nursing would help, would let me use my skills for something besides war. I lasted 6 months. Every patient reminded me of someone who'd died. Every emergency reminded me of Normandy. Every time someone coded, every time we lost someone, I was back in that tent, covered in blood, making impossible decisions. I'd have panic attacks in the middle of shifts, freeze during procedures, wake up screaming in the nurses' quarters. They let me go, gently, kindly, but they let me go. I tried other jobs, secretary work, retail, anything that wasn't medical. Nothing worked. Nothing felt real. I was just going through the motions, pretending to be a person, when really I was just empty. I got married in 1950. Good man, a veteran, infantry, European theater. We understood each other's silences, our shared nightmares, the distance we both kept from the world. We had a daughter in 1952. I tried to be a good mother, tried to love her the way mothers are supposed to. But I was afraid to love her too much, because I'd learned that loving people meant losing them, meant watching them die and being unable to save them. So I kept distance, even from my own child. She's grown now, has children of her own. We're not close, never have been. She doesn't understand why her mother is so cold, so distant, How do I explain? How do I tell her that I used up all my capacity for love on a beach in Normandy, that I gave everything I had to boys who died anyway, that there's nothing left for the people who lived? My husband died in 1978, heart attack, quick at least. He didn't suffer. I buried him, went to the funeral, listened to people talk about what a good man he was, how much he'd be missed, and I felt nothing. Just that same emptiness that's been with me since 1944. I'm 64 years old now, living alone, retired, spend my days existing, reading, watching television, waiting. For what? I'm not sure. Death, maybe. An end to the waiting. The nightmares never stopped. 40 years later, and I still dream about that blonde corporal, about the lieutenant who died on the table, about the 18-year-old crying for his mom. I still see their faces, clear as day, clearer than my daughter's face, clearer than my husband's. The dead stay with you, the living fade. But the dead, they're permanent. I read articles sometimes about PTSD, about trauma, about how war affects people long after the fighting stops. They understand it now in ways they didn't in 1945. But understanding doesn't help, doesn't change anything, doesn't bring back the person I was before. People thank me sometimes. Veterans, their children. Thank you for your service, they say. You helped save so many lives. I nod. Say thank you. Don't tell them the truth. That I didn't save lives. I triaged, I decided, I let boys die because other boys had better chances. I made mistakes that killed. I became something less than human to function in conditions no human should endure. That's not saving lives, that's just managing death. They made movies about D-Day, about the heroism, the sacrifice, the greatest generation storming the beaches to save the world. They show the soldiers, the fighting, the bravery. They don't show what came after, the aid stations, the blood, the decisions, the boys dying in tents while we moved on to the next ones. They don't show us, and maybe that's better. Maybe some things shouldn't be shown, shouldn't be remembered, shouldn't be honored. Maybe some sacrifices are too ugly to celebrate. I tried to write about it once in the 50s, tried to put it all down on paper, thought maybe if I could explain it, could make people understand, it would help. I made it 3 pages before I had to stop, before the memories became too much, before I was back there in that tent, unable to breathe. I burned what I'd written, never tried again. Some things can't be put into words. Some experiences can't be shared. They just live inside you like shrapnel you can't remove. They hurt, they ache, they never stop hurting, but you learn to live with them or you don't live at all. Tom died in 1976. Cancer. He'd survived the war, survived his wounds, made it home. And cancer killed him anyway. At his funeral, I stood by his grave and thought about all the boys who never made it home, who died on beaches and in fields and in aid stations, who never got to grow old, never got to have families, never got to die of something ordinary like cancer. Tom was one of the lucky ones. He got 30 more years. But I looked at his face in the casket, 62 years old, worn down by life, and I wondered if lucky was the right word. Maybe the ones who died quickly were the lucky ones. Maybe instant death on a beach was better than 40 years of carrying it, 40 years of nightmares and emptiness and distance. Maybe we survivors got the worst deal. I don't know. I'll never know. What I know is this. I went to Normandy in June 1944 to save lives, to help, to heal. And I came back something else. Something broken. Something that looks human but isn't quite. The war ended 40 years ago. The fighting stopped. The killing stopped. We won. But for me, for all of us who were there, who saw it, who did it, the war never ended. It just moved inside us, became part of us, took up residence in our heads and hearts and never left. We never came home. Not really. We're all still there, still in those tents, still covered in blood, still making impossible decisions, still watching boys die, still trying to save them, still failing, always failing. That's what they don't tell you about war. That's what the movies don't show. That's what the medals don't acknowledge. The cost isn't just the dead, it's the living. It's the ones who survived but didn't, who came home but stayed behind, who kept breathing but stopped living. I survived Normandy. That's what the records say. Lieutenant Catherine Hayes, Army Nurse Corps, served with distinction, returned home safely. But it's a lie. I died there with the rest of them, with the blonde corporal and the lieutenant and the 18-year-old and all the others. What came back was just a ghost, just an echo of a person going through the motions, pretending, waiting for it to be over. 40 years later, I'm still waiting, still there, still dying, and always